Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology, and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com.
Well, here we are. It's only about a month or so after the iPhones were released, and obviously the iPhone Air made a big splash when it was revealed. Good for marketing, good for all those video clips and TikTok videos and people testing and all that. But now there's we maybe kind of alluded to it, but now it would appear that iPhone Air production is getting slashed because there hasn't been the demand for it. I think I might have mentioned that when I ordered the Pro Max that that was the one that was most the shipping delays was most out, as was the base iPhone 17, and they still are. They're about 3 or 4 weeks before you can get one at the moment if you order online. And the iPhone is still like day and date in terms of order. Now, I've got a couple of views on this particular one, and maybe we'll start with the first one. It would seem that Apple's strategy of trying to figure out what the fourth new iPhone is. So they had the Mini. It got an enthusiastic fan base, but it didn't really sell, so they dropped it. They then tried the Plus model, the bigger version. I think that didn't go. That was even worse. To be honest, I don't know about you. I don't think I've actually seen a Plus model in the wild of the current generation of Pluses.
No.
And now the Air is apparently suffering the same fate that those models are, and it may be that I think, from Apple's purposes, I think the iPhone Air has some other purposes other than sales. Like it's, it could be, good enough for them to be an R&D testing thing out in the wild before they release the Fold model that, it kind of is made in the same way. But it kind of highlights, if you look at it from that point of view to begin with, that maybe the 3 phone strategy was more than enough, at least in terms of like their current releases, that's all it wants, because ultimately people want more utility. So there might be, like, I think we both said it, very nice looking phone, very flashy. The idea of carrying around a super thin phone that isn't heavy but still has the screen, etc., is intriguing. But it's compromised in ways that, from a utility perspective, makes it a no-go, effectively.
Yeah, definitely. It's like having a Swiss Army knife with just one option on it, really. I think we spoke about it before. I love the idea of the iPhone Air. I like the idea that you've got a smaller or thinner, lighter weight option. But we do so much on our phones now, and everyone has a unique need or a unique set of functions that they perform on that phone. And if one of them's missing, it's no good to you. And I think we saw that with the MacBook generations that went down strictly to the 2 ports, and then they release versions with that additional functionality, i.e. ports, and suddenly they become the more popular models. So I think, as you point out, Ben, by and large, saving a few grams but then not having something you need in what effectively is a device that rules our lives, that's crippling. So it's not surprising, I think, in some regard. I'm sure, as you say, everyone looks at the iPhone Air, they love it, they love the look of it, they love the idea of it, but when it comes to actually what's a personal use case for it, unless all you do is call your friends, old-fashioned style, then it's probably not quite right.
Just to pick up on something you said there about correlations with MacBooks and thinking more of a positive slant on it, if you were to compare it to the original MacBook Air, which I'm going to say was 2008, I think that came out.
Yeah.
Obviously there was the jaw-dropping scene of Steve Jobs pulling it out of a manila envelope. That MacBook, I remember seeing someone use it once, and it just wasn't it was barely usable, because the trade-offs for getting it that thin and light, you lost out on performance and ports and all sorts of things that really reduced the utility. But however, 3 years later, they got it to a point where it was an incredibly good computer, and the MacBook Air is now probably one of their most successful models that they release. Maybe something like that might happen with the iPhone Air eventually, or maybe the ideas that the Air encapsulates are actually incorporated into the standard models that they release.
Yeah, I think the latter's more likely. I mean, I think about if you want to go to the modern MacBook, the M series MacBooks, I was, really considering an Air, and then I looked at, it's 2 cores down on an M1 MacBook. It's, all of these things, and then you start to think, I probably do need just a little bit of power. Maybe not today, but in 2 to 3 years' time, more power will be better. Being able to expand or order it fully expanded early, it gives you longevity to a device. And I think, if I was to say anything about the iPhone Air, in Apple's range, I would imagine that the iPhone Air would have the shortest working lifespan of any of those devices. And that might come down to a number of things that we don't know yet because it hasn't been out very long. But, sure, it's lighter and thinner. That might make it more breakable for starters. And then just functions and how well will it perform, when we get to iOS 21 or wherever we're headed with it. I can't even remember what we're up to on that. But, yeah, you think you'd just be better off getting an iPhone Pro?
Absolutely. One other thing I did want to mention is that there's also the possibility that it actually grows in sales over the course of the year, and the comparison there is to the XR, which came out in 2018. Everyone initially wrote that off as a model that bombed on release because everyone was buying the XS, the more premium model, but then it turned out over the course of that 12-month cycle, it ended up being the best-selling of all of them, with the idea being that maybe the Air can potentially fit into a category where the buyer is not like glued to iPhone release cycles and is just buying them when they rock up in the store and they go, oh, that looks nice, I might just get that one. And that might happen over the course of 12 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's quite a possibility. I still tend to think that it'll have if people are holding on average, 3 to 4 years for your standard iPhone, I would think that the iPhone Air would have a lesser cycle than that, probably 2 years. But I could be wrong about that. And if I am wrong, then as you say, over time people will realise that, and it's a nicer phone, and probably not this generation, but if they persist for another couple of generations, I'm sure you'll see the features and the functions start to come to it.
Absolutely. And just lastly, it seems like Samsung is cancelling its S25 Edge for probably similar reasons. But I can actually see them cancelling it because, Samsung takes a more, throw things at the wall approach in terms of getting things done. And they probably did this because they got the heads up that Apple was releasing one. And that kind of makes sense.
Oh, I agree, but also the other thing for Samsung is if they realise no one wants an iPhone Air, ain't no one going to want a Samsung.
Absolutely. Just continuing on with a bit of tech, there was a bit of concern that Amazon's AWS outage, it's sort of highlighting a almost too big to fail kind of thing where we've got all this concentration of cloud services, with AWS being the biggest one. And although I was trying to figure out exactly what the bug was, but it sounded like it was not necessarily that the cloud itself, that it's the data centers it's hosted on went down. It's more the handshake that happens to get access to those things that cause the problem. But I guess the wider issue is that so much of what lives on the internet is connected to a service like AWS. They're not the only ones, but I believe there's only 2 or 3 really big ones that host everything. And it really highlights that if it goes down like that, what do you do? What's the what's the redundancy? The problem, of course, is that it would be up to individual companies and providers and all that to have redundant cloud services to access.
Well, I think they already do. I don't know that I necessarily buy into this concentration idea of these companies. So, say there were 20 companies that ran everyone's web services instead of these main 3. One of them will still, like, what happened, the issue is really quite a generic issue as I understand it, that rarely happens. But when it happens, it's serious enough, obviously, to take down websites and services. So that's serious. But even if you had 20 providers, it would still mean everyone on that one provider would have no service. So the issue, as far as I can see, isn't that we don't have enough providers, because it wasn't as if you could access those services via another one of the providers. If those providers were using any service that went down, there's no service. So I think it just exposes, the fragility of the system, that if you have an error like this, whether it's malicious or just a basic, trip in the system, you're offline and you better learn to live with it. Well, or have an alternative.
Well, that's the on the alternative. I'm guessing that there'd be a lot of companies, I would say, in particular, that wouldn't want to pay for a second service that's just sitting there idling as a backup for the random one in a 5-year event or 10-year event that might happen.
Yeah, well, I don't know enough about how the system works, but how would you even have a backup on a second system? And how would you switch it on? How would you know to switch it on? When would you switch it on? And what would it do to your existing service anyway? I don't know. I mean, but to me, I think it's a risk of modern life. I don't know that there is a solution.
No,
except don't fail.
Exactly. I mean, it would just mean that if you were to do some sort of secondary hosting, it could be done, I'm sure. It just would come with a big price tag and a lot of, administrative maintenance to keep it going, which, again, it comes back to that risk analysis component. What are we prepared to, put up with if we don't do that?
Well, that's right. One outage for 6 hours every 5 years. I know everyone screams about the billions of dollars that were lost, apparently, but, seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And just finally, completely different topic now. Just sort of popped onto the radar this morning, actually, was this idea that COVID vaccines could have a cancer-fighting benefit. Cue the comments. Now, obviously, in reading through this, it's more a case of interesting association, I guess, rather than definitive proof of anything. Obviously, there was people, I guess they were tracking people who had taken the vaccine or not taken the vaccine who had cancer, and it turned out that with certain cancers that those that took the COVID-19 vaccine actually lived longer compared to the others. But again, it hardly seems like again, what was it I said before? Association. There was an interesting association made or observation made that maybe warrants further study. Let's put it that way.
And they will. So they'll now go and test this theory. Personally, I think this is amazing, and we can go into that in a minute, but I guess you start with the fact that the only reason that there's a headline for this is because the word COVID vaccine appears in it. If it wasn't for that, probably everyone would just go back to eating their cereal, But what's fascinating about this is basically what cancer cells do to block the body's natural immune response is they secrete a protein on the cell surface that when the body's immune cells come up to the cancer, basically turn off the immune cells so they don't attack the cancer. So normally, if you don't have a cancer or a tumour, what will happen is we have cancerous cells all the time. The immune system naturally recognises them and takes them out. So what tumours can be very good at doing is tricking the body's own immune system. And it appears that through the mRNA vaccines that are used for COVID, it basically turns off the block that the cancer cells are producing on the immune system. So that's fascinating. And why I couldn't, from reading the article, really understand why it was the COVID vaccine or why there was this association with the COVID vaccine. I think there's something in the way that the mRNA is created for that vaccine. And it's fascinating because if it is shown to be an actual effect, then that gives us an enormous amount of clues towards immunotherapies or effective immunotherapy or modulation of cancers and tumours. So exciting. Once again, it's could lead to quite an amazing medical breakthrough, and these are the sorts of things that we should all be excited about when technology and science combine to take us a step further to happier, healthier lifestyles.
Absolutely. And just that idea that, using this new technology, and it still is new in its practical application, that they could use it to target other things, in terms of that. And it kind of, is exciting when you think about like the potential over the coming years of what potentially could come out of this.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, I think, as we know, everyone talks about AI and, really all they're talking about is large language models, which is really not the most exciting or doesn't, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't have as much potential apart from the human interaction and remodeling of human ideas. But where AI and a lot of these tools can be exceptionally powerful is unlocking the secrets behind healthy living and better living, and unlocking mysteries of the world, whether it's inside our bodies or out in space.
Absolutely. All right, Steve, I might wrap it up there. As far as circling back to the iPhone Air, I'll just go back to admiring it from afar in a store and just seeing where it goes in the coming years, or whether it just disappears.
Absolutely. I might go and have a look at one now before they discontinue it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that's it for this week's episode. We'll catch you next time.